Myanmar is officially a Buddhist nation, a land of golden pagodas, saffron-robed monks, and a spiritual tradition that preaches compassion for every living being. 4% of its population is Muslim. That is over 2 million people. 2 million people with mosques, with schools, with histories stretching back 1,000 years into that same soil. Her name is Sumaya. She is 31 years old. She wakes before dawn every morning, not from habit, but from something older than habit, something that lives just beneath the surface of her sleep, a kind of vigilance that does not switch off. When she opens her eyes, the first thing she sees is a ceiling that is not hers, a room in a crowded camp in Bangladesh just across the border. She has been here for 6 years. Her youngest child has never seen the village where Sumaya was born. In her bag, she always keeps a bag packed, always. There is a folded piece of paper. It is a photograph of a mosque, not a grand mosque, a simple one with a green corrugated tin roof, the mosque where her father prayed, the mosque where she was married. It no longer exists. The question that haunts Sumaya, the question she cannot answer, cannot set down, cannot stop turning over in her hands, is this. If your country says you were never its citizen, does that mean you were never real? This is not a philosophical question for her. It is an administrative one, and in Myanmar today it has a devastating answer. The Rohingya people. That name, depending on where you are in the world, will either land with the weight of 1,000 headlines, or it will mean almost nothing at all. Both reactions tell you something important about how power decides which stories get told. The Rohingya are a Muslim ethnic group from the Rakhine state of Myanmar, the westernmost strip of the country, pressed up against the Bay of Bengal. For most of the 20th century, they lived, farmed, traded, built mosques, raised children. Then, in 1982, Myanmar passed a citizenship law. It listed 135 recognized ethnic groups. The Rohingya were not on the list. With a single piece of legislation, over 1 million people became stateless, not expelled, not killed, not yet, just quietly, legally rendered non-persons. Here's a number that should stop you cold. By 2017, over 700,000 Rohingya had fled Myanmar in a single year. The United Nations called it a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. The history of Islam is full of communities that survived in the margins of hostile empires, but what makes this different is the modernity of the mechanism. This was not medieval persecution. This was paperwork. This was policy, and it happened while the world was watching something else. So where does this story actually begin? Because this is what almost every Western news report gets wrong. They begin in 2017, some begin in 1982, but to understand what is happening to the Rohingya, you have to go back much further than that. Islam arrived in the Arakan region, what is now Rakhine State, as early as the 8th century. Arab and Persian traders carried it along the same maritime routes that carried silk and spices. By the 15th century, the Muslim community there was not a minority footnote, it was woven into the cultural bloodstream of an entire coastal civilization. The Arakan Sultanate, centered in the city of Mrauk-U, was one of the most cosmopolitan kingdoms in all of Southeast Asia. Muslim scholars sat in the royal court. Muslim merchants funded the ports. The kings of Arakan, though Buddhist, used both Buddhist and Islamic titles on their coins. The two traditions lived inside the same political and cultural architecture. This is the part the official story omits. The Rohingya are not recent arrivals. They are not, as Myanmar's government has insisted for decades, illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. They are the descendants of a civilization that existed on that soil long before Myanmar as a modern nation-state existed at all. So why has that history been buried? Because history in the hands of a nationalist state is not a record, it is a weapon. And Myanmar's military establishment has been wielding it with tremendous precision for over 40 years. But here is the part that most historians, even sympathetic ones, rarely talk about. The part that reframes everything you just heard. Because what the military did in 2017 was not a sudden explosion of violence. It was the final act of something that had been quietly, methodically constructed over decades. A psychological architecture, a slow dismantling of identity long before a single soldier crossed a single threshold. Before we get to that, I want to make sure you understand something, because without this, the rest of the story doesn't make sense. What the Myanmar government did, and this is the chilling precision of it, was to erase the Rohingya in steps. First, the name. For years, authorities refused to use the word Rohingya at all, insisting the community call themselves Bengali, a term designed to imply they belonged somewhere else. In 2014, during a national census supported by international organizations, Rohingya were barred from registering under their own ethnicity. They were essentially told, you may be counted, but only if you agree you are not who you say you are. Then came the restrictions, freedom of movement, limits on marriage, on childbirth. A Rohingya couple in Rakhine State at the height of these policies required government permission to have a second child. Think about that. Government permission to have a family. And then, in August 2017, the military launched what it called clearance operations. Villages were burned, women were attacked, men and boys were killed. The stories that came out in the weeks that followed were the kind that human rights investigators use words like genocide to describe. Today, over 1 million Rohingya live in refugee camps in Bangladesh. Cox's Bazar, the camp where most of them shelter, is now one of the largest refugee settlements on Earth. It is a city of tarpaulins and grief, spreading across a hillside, growing every year. And back in Myanmar, in the villages where the Rohingya once lived, Buddhist settlers have been moved in. New buildings have gone up. In some places, the land has been cleared so completely that the villages might never have existed. That is what erasure looks like when it is done carefully. But here is what they could not erase. In those camps, in tents and temporary classrooms and makeshift madrasas, children are learning to read Arabic. Mothers are teaching their daughters the prayers they were taught by their own mothers. Young men are memorizing poetry in Rohingya, the Rohingya language, a language that has no official script, that has never been printed in a textbook, that exists only in the mouths of people who refuse to let it die. This is what the untold stories of Islamic history teach us, again and again, that the most resilient thing a community possesses is not a building, it is not a flag, it is not even a name on a government list. It is the act of passing something on, quietly, stubbornly, in the dark. There is something the bureaucrats who draft citizenship laws never account for. They can revoke a passport, they can demolish a mosque, they can move settlers onto the land, rename the rivers, rewrite the textbooks. But they cannot legislate what a mother whispers to her child at night. They cannot stamp invalid on a memory. Faith, real faith, the kind that has survived 1,000 years of empires that rose and fell and turned to dust, does not live in institutions. It lives in continuation, in the stubborn, almost irrational insistence that what your grandfather knew is worth knowing, that who your grandmother was is worth remembering. The Rohingya have been told by the full administrative power of a modern nation-state that they do not exist. And every morning, in a camp in Cox's Bazar, a child wakes up and learns a prayer in a language the world does not recognize. That child is the answer. That child is the history. And no law in the world has ever been powerful enough to silence that. Now, before you leave, I want to ask you something. If what you just watched moved you, if you found yourself thinking, I had no idea this existed, then there is something you should know. Right now, there are hundreds of communities just like the Rohingya, Muslim communities living extraordinary, invisible lives in the corners of the world that history books forgot.
Communities in communist states, in frozen tundras, in the heart of the Amazon, in the streets of cities you walk through every day, each one with a story this powerful, this untold, this human. That is exactly what FactSeeker exists to do. Every single video on this channel is a door into a world you were never shown. If you want to keep opening those doors, if you want to be the person who actually knows these stories, subscribe to FactSeeker right now. Not because we are asking you to, but because you have already proven in the last 9 minutes that you are exactly the kind of person who needs to know these things. The next door opens very soon. We will see you there.